For us to be great leaders, we need to continually move away from controlling to empowering. Empowering leaders encourage growth, but empowering others is hard work. It takes effort and commitment, but it's so worth it. It's also a biblical, Jesus-following approach that we're all called to, and we need to get this right. What would our band, our worship team, our church, our city look like if we all grew in our ability to be empowering leaders? I think one of the biggest things for us to focus on as a team in this coming season, the biggest concept for us to grab hold of, is this concept of empowering leadership versus controlling leadership. And this issue applies to everyone, whether you're an MD or a worship leader or leading a group of instruments or a band member itself, whether you're a saint, a deacon or an elder. This is something that we all have to come to terms with in our leadership. One of our 4 values as a team is to encourage growth. But what kind of environment, what kind of leadership is going to encourage growth? And of course, the correct answer is not controlling, it's empowering. We all know it, but we all have a tendency to control. And I just want to take a moment to recognize that I have deficiencies, I have bad habits, I can definitely be controlling at times, and I recognize that. And so this might come across a bit hypocritical to say, hey, Paul, you control, yet you're talking about empowering leadership. Well, I'm committed to moving away from being a controlling leader to being an empowering leader, because there's so much at stake. And so I want to be humble, I want to be teachable, I want to learn from others, I want to have conversations about it, I want to have people give me feedback on it, I want to become the best leader that I can by being the most empowering leader that I can as well. So in these short videos, we're going to look a bit of defining controlling versus empowering leadership together. And then other videos, we're going to look at some controlling behavior and why we may default to controlling behavior in the way that we lead. We're going to look at our model for leadership, who that is, who they are, and what correct biblical leadership is. And then lastly, we're going to look at a few empowering behavioral habits that we as leaders can start to grab hold of in growing to become, moving from a controlling leader to a more empowering leader as well. So for the rest of this video, very quickly going to look at defining controlling versus empowering leadership. What's the difference between controlling and empowering leadership? So I've got a bunch of statements here that I want you to think about. Do you agree with these? Do you disagree with them? And where does this land? Where do you tend to have an emphasis on? Which of these 2 contrasting elements of a sentence do you find yourself being closer aligned with? Ask yourself that question. Ask someone else that knows you really well where they think you sit in these polar opposites of things. So here are some statements. Statement number 1, controlling leaders build towards themselves, empowering leaders build away from themselves. Controlling leaders build towards themselves, empowering leaders build away from themselves. Statement number 2, controlling leaders create dependent followers, whereas empowering leaders create more leaders themselves. That discipleship model, disciples making disciples. Statement number 3, controlling leaders stifle growth, an empowering leader fosters growth. Where do you sit in that statement? Controlling leaders become a limit to the team, whereas empowering leaders become a platform for the team to build upon. Controlling leaders become a limit to the team, empowering leaders become a platform for the team to build on. Statement number 5, controlling leaders feel pressure to do everything themselves, whereas empowering leaders delegate to others. Statement number 6, controlling leaders manage tasks, whereas empowering leaders create learning opportunities. Managing tasks versus creating opportunities. Statement number 7, a controlling leader will tend to treat people like tools. An empowering leader will see people as collaborators and teammates. Statement number 8, controlling leaders prioritize the short term, whereas an empowering leader has long-term vision. Controlling leaders, you might say, manage, and empowering leaders lead. Statement number 9, controlling leaders spend their efforts on executing a task, whereas empowering leaders invest their efforts in growing others. So controlling leaders spend their effort to execute a task, empowering leaders invest their effort in growing others. You'll see one is linear, an exchange for this much effort for this much task on a single exchange. The other one The empowering one is exponential. You multiply yourself, you invest in someone and teach them how to do the leadership role, and they will do things exponentially. So to put those statements, those 9 statements, into context, an example would be an empowering MD doesn't just manage instruments, they produce other MDs. Another example, an empowering worship leader doesn't just lead a worship set, they produce other worship leaders. There's this inherent element of multiplication in empowering leadership. I want to leave us with this challenging statement for us to get to grips with. It's by Craig Rochelle. He has this challenging statement. He says, you can have control or you can have growth, but you can't have both. We need to get this idea that we cannot continue to control things if we want the team to grow. We have a value of encouraging growth. We have to deal with issues of control. We want growth, not control. It's part of our values. As leaders, we can control every aspect of a worship set, but the reality is that our teams and our people will not grow because of it. We can have control or we can have growth, but we can't have both. If we recognize that we have a tendency to control, if we have a tendency to be a controlling leader, there is hope. We can change, and we're all on this journey together, becoming more empowering and less controlling. And so in the following videos, we're going to look at 4 reasons for us to default to controlling leadership. Then following that, we're going to have a look at our model for leadership and what we can learn from that. And lastly, I'm going to give some practical handles, practical things to consider on how to grow in our empowering leadership.